Hello everyone, good morning, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Got a bit of a different setup today. We're going to be working on the whiteboard, but first I thought I'd just say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining me on this broadcast. Maybe let me know that you can see and hear me all right. I have a little bit of a different technical setup, so hopefully it's all working. We can see, Dave's in the chat. Hi Dave, thank you so much for being there in the chat. Tenny, Yoko, great to have you with us. Japan and France there, I believe. So all different parts of the world. And Randy and Cindy, oh God, I have to admit, I'm a little bit, I gotta wake up a little bit. I'm getting the morning go juice to get back in the swing of things. But thank you everyone for joining me. I think I was saying to someone, I can't remember, we're probably going to be starting to wrap up the CGC show soon. So I don't know what week it might be, but maybe next week might be the last one. I wonder what we can do. Maybe we'll see if we can get the team on to have a chat. But it was lovely to have Gohar on with us last week. That was fantastic. Dave said I'm a little soft. Let me see if I can turn myself up. I don't know if that's going to work, but hopefully you can hear me clearly enough. Today we're going to be talking about rhythm and sight reading rhythm. I actually, for the first time in a long time, I had a rehearsal this week with other musicians. How about that? So my good friend Janet Agostino, she's doing her PhD on arrangement and transcription, and we had to record some of her arrangements, and so we had a quintet rehearsal. We're doing an arrangement of Chattanooga Choo Choo and Take the A Train. So some really fun pieces, but also had some interesting rhythms, which kind of inspired today's topic of rhythm. And rhythm is definitely something that, as classical guitarists, we don't get as much experience with rhythms. I think in classical music in general, we have a pretty simple array of rhythms that we deal with. Of course, we dabble in jazz idioms and genres and more pop music and things, but our rhythmic world is actually not that complex, I would argue, compared to some other musical genres. So we've got that in our advantage, but we also work by ourselves so often, and we often memorize pieces, so we're not going through rhythms and reading them as we would maybe words on a page as language. Or even pitches, I think, get a bit more of a workout than rhythms do. So in today's class presentation, we're going to be talking about rhythms in the sense of sight reading. And it is a little different when we talk about sight reading as opposed to learning how to read rhythms if we're learning a piece of music. But just saying hello to a few more people in the chat. Andrew's saying that the audio is a bit better. Thank you for that feedback. Brooke is here, and John saying hi from Sydney. And David's there from California. Hi, David. Great to have you with us. And Heidi's in from Nashville. Thanks for joining us. So, sight reading, let me first sort of differentiate between sight reading and reading notation. So, I did my doctoral thesis on sight reading, and I took quite a deep dive into this about 10 years ago. And it's always been a topic of interest, I think, to classical guitarists because it seems like something that's hard to attain. It's a mysterious challenge for us. But really, when it comes down to it, it's just our lack of exposure to the sight reading process compared to other musicians in other settings, like an orchestral setting or in a band setting. It's not as much part of our musical culture in classical guitar. And I also want to differentiate between sight reading and reading notation, because they're often conflated. You'll find sight reading books that really teach you how to read music. And I see sight reading as a very specific skill. And that skill is being able to have music put in front of you and to play that music. Now, what's the purpose of that? The purpose of that is so you can interact with other people. Let's say you're in an ensemble and someone gets some music out and say, hey, let's all read through this. Then your sight reading ability is there to make music on the spot with no preparation. And another use for sight reading might be in a lesson where someone asks you to do something differently. And you may have come across the experience where you've learned a piece, you've played a piece, and then the teacher says, well, could you please play from this measure and maybe do it in this way, or could we move a note? And something changes in the music and suddenly you're stumped because you've learned it a certain way and it's become quite ingrained in your fingers or in your mind, and then to sight read it anew is a whole different skill set. And then also just exploring music. If you want to read some new music that you don't have access to a recording or you've never heard before, sight reading is a really wonderful way there to explore a wider range of music. But once again, let's take the example of someone puts music in front of you and you need to play in an ensemble. The biggest skill there is not actually to read correctly. It's not about playing the right pitch. It really is about rhythm. It's about staying in time. It's about being able to play with the other people and make that music happen, because inevitably there's going to be some slip-ups. And the skill that's more important than complete accuracy is actually the skill to keep going. So it's the skill to play one note, two note, mistake, keep going, and not dropping a beat. Because if you drop a beat, then you get out of sync with all your ensemble partners. If you play a wrong pitch, however, and keep going, fine. We're just reading for the purposes of fun or getting a sense of a piece. Maybe you're sitting down for the first time. So the purpose of sight reading, in my opinion, is quite separate from learning notation. Classical guitarists, I think, or a lot of musicians in learning repertoire, if we make a mistake, we'll stop, go back and fix it. So that's probably the majority of our experience with mistakes, is where we stop and go back to fix it. Whereas when we're reading in a sight reading context, it really is important to keep going and to let go of the idea of mistakes and just keep forging forward. The idea that we're not aiming for something perfect. We're not aiming for a perfect rendition. We're just getting a feel for a piece. We're just getting if we like it, if it works for an ensemble, etc. So I think that's an important distinction between sight reading and reading music to learn or to study. Now, of all the research I did, I think the most impactful aspect of sight reading comes down to pattern recognition. And when I was doing my work with, I had guinea pigs. I had the guitar department at the Yale School of Music as my guinea pigs. And so about twice a week we would meet and I would give them all these different little tests and things to test out ideas I had. And very unscientific, I will say. But some of them led me down a path of thought that was really useful. And so, for instance, one example of one of these little sort of tests is, let's say we have this is regarding pitch, okay? Now, we take a 6-string chord, which we could argue is, relatively complex. It's got an accidental in there, it's got a sharp, right? However, I would wager, I'm looking at the microphone, I should be looking over there, I would wager that chord is relatively familiar to you, and that chord can be played faster than, say, this chord. So, if we look at it objectively, let's say it's a musician that's doesn't play classical guitar at all, and we say which chord is more challenging to play in a sight reading context. Well, this has more pitches. It has 6 notes. It also has more ledger lines, actually, that go lower down. This note has only 4 notes, does have one more accidental in there, and has fewer ledger lines. However, that immediately, without question, from my 20 plus years of teaching, I know that is going to be the one that stumps people. And the reason is familiarity, pattern recognition. So when I say pattern recognition in terms of pitch, we're not, usually when it comes to this, we're not really reading those notes as we wouldn't pass out syllables in a word that we're familiar with. Even if it was supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, we would initially, the very first time, if we'd never seen Mary Poppins, we would go we would spell it out. But if we had seen Mary Poppins and we'd heard it before in the song format, no less, then we would read it in flow as a pattern because we've recognized it. This, however, is unfamiliar to many of us. It's up in 9th position, you've got B, and then F sharp on the 11th fret, A on the 10th fret, D sharp on the 11th fret of the first string, and we don't play it very often. So that's why it's not as familiar. It's not that it's objectively more difficult, it's just notes on the fingerboard, it's hand-wise it fits, but this is just that much more familiar to us. Same goes for rhythmic patterns. So let me give you an example of a rhythmic pattern then that can simply make things more difficult. Okay. This is kind of nice actually, because if we were in a classroom setting, people might call out the answer to this, but because we're all separated by screens and we can't hear one another, we get to, some of you may recognize this. So let's start. Let me think. Okay. I probably should have worked on this earlier. Yes. Okay. Okay, this is 4/4. Yeah, you can see that rhythm, great. So that's a rhythm, right? And I think at first glance, I'm not trying to play tricks on you here, but that rhythm at first glance is probably something you couldn't sight read, right? You couldn't simply get on the open string and play it and say, oh, that rhythm I know, fine. Now, one thing to do about rhythms, and we'll talk a bit more about this, is the fact that shorter durations often seem more complex. So this rhythm, I could rewrite it, and I could say, I'm basically going to expand everything out. I'm going to double it. That's one bar. And then I wonder if anyone's got this rhythm yet. All right, so it's exactly the same rhythm in terms of the relationship of the durations. It's just everything's doubled, everything's expanded out. So that looks easier. So that's one aspect of reading, is it looks more familiar because the rhythms are a little less complex. Now, all I have to do to make you read this rhythm instantaneously is do this. Ready? Dun, da, 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 dun, dun. And now you know the rhythm. Okay, so it's a good example of something that looks quite complex, but because it's a kind of common musical vernacular, if that's the right word, common musical idea that's, permeates our Western culture, da, 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 da. Dum, bum. It's an interesting thing. I see my wife Evita often do that. She does it with classes of dancers to get their attention, kind of like when you have classes of kids. I think they do that a lot in Suzuki teaching. They clap a rhythm and then the kids clap back, and it's a way of centering their attention again. So I've seen Evita with students go bum, ba da 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 da, and all the students go, because you can't resist it, right? You can't resist finishing off that little musical rhythmic phrase. The equivalent of that, the very nerdy equivalent of that, is a story. Brahms and Liszt and Clara Schumann, they all knew each other. And there was a story, it may be just myth, but the story is that one of them would go down in the middle of the night and play two chords that don't resolve. And of course, being the giant musical nerds that they are, then in the most affectionate way, someone would have to come down and resolve the chord because they couldn't stand sitting there in bed with an unresolved harmonic cadence. Anyway, so that's the rhythmic equivalent. But isn't it interesting that a rhythm that would seem relatively foreign perhaps, or you'd have to sit down and work out with subdivision how to place each note, is suddenly, it becomes a pattern, something that you recognize. Now, if you were to play, we very rarely would play this on the classical guitar, I suppose, but if you were to play that and work it through, then you would actually start to get to a point where you would associate that oral pattern with the visual pattern, and then when you saw it next time in a piece of music, you wouldn't really be reading the notes. You'd actually just be recognizing a pattern. Another nice example from my sight reading research I found, it was a study done at the Royal College of Music where they had piano players, and they had two pools of piano players. One set was good sight readers and one set was bad sight readers. And they took music by Dussek, which is a 19th century composer, sort of a contemporary of Beethoven, but not very well known. and it might be the equivalent of Matiega for us, right? So it's a familiar musical language, but the composer was not particularly well known, nor were his works. And so they gave these students a pool of poor sight readers and a poor advanced sight readers this same music, and they changed some notes. Now, these weren't notes that were changed so it looked odd, you know, sort of, notes up here and notes down there and sharps and double sharps and flats. No, it wasn't obvious. All they did was shift a couple of notes so that, in fact, it looked... That's Evita calling from America. So it looked like the music was normal, nothing was changed visually. But if you played it and if you knew the piece, then you wouldn't realize that something was changed. So what happened was the pool of poor sight readers read the passage of this composer Dussek, and they played every single note correctly, including the notes that were moved around, so the notes that were adjusted, because they were reading note by note by note by note. Then the good sight readers read this passage, and they actually played the music as it was originally written. So they weren't reading they weren't reading the music that was on the page. They were taking in their knowledge of the style. They were taking in patterns that they would expect in this kind of music, and they were sight reading not to play perfectly, not because they were learning this piece, but rather because they were sight reading. They were taking in chunks of information. So I just thought it was a really interesting study, because it really shows that sight reading is about taking in chunks of information, pattern recognition, so much so that if you adjusted it on purpose, trying to be tricky, you'd actually be playing notes that weren't written there, but notes that fit. So hopefully that all reinforces the point that when we sight read, we're actually using patterns. And the more patterns that we become familiar with, the better. And that's really where our sight reading speeds up. Yes, we have pitch, and everyone, I think, defaults to thinking pitch is the key to sight reading, understanding the fingerboard, but I would argue it's more rhythm, to be honest. So, I guess as a teacher, I would argue that I am more of a teach you how to fish kind of teacher. And this is very much a teach you how to fish kind of lesson, because I'm not going to give you lots of examples from the repertoire. You're going to have to go into your own repertoire and find examples to work out. But essentially, what we have three steps, right, that we're going to be doing. First is to break it down. I'm not going to write it all out. Break it down. So that's where you use subdivision. And I've talked about subdivision many times before. You can probably go back to some previous workshops I did on the CGC show on YouTube, and you can hear about subdivision, but I feel like I talk about it a bit too much. So you can start by breaking down the rhythm and working it out. And we'll do a bit of that now. But the next step then would be to, let's say, I'm just going to make an acronym. No, that's not right. Work it out, right? So you work it out and you play it and you go over it until it really starts to become something like the rhythm that's so familiar that it then becomes a pattern, right? So the first step is going to be breaking down rhythms that you don't understand or that are unfamiliar, and then going through them so that it becomes more and more familiar. And then finally, it becomes a pattern that you recognize, so that when you sight read, you're not actually taking in the information, you're just breaking it, having it as a pattern. Okay, I might take a couple of questions. Hopefully it's been clear so far. We're going to work through a few examples, but I might take a few questions, and I also may just text Evita saying, teaching. So let's have a look, see if any questions came in. Lots of hellos from all over the place. Yeah, Elma made the comment that word patterns are a good way to increase reading speeds. I think, I think what Elma's referring to is the idea sometimes you can associate words or phrases with repeatable patterns of rhythms or repeated rhythmic figures. And that's absolutely true. So it's a nice way to associate things. And in fact, if a particular song, often vocals or lyrics in a piece of music have a lot of syncopation and interesting rhythms. And so you probably already have internalized quite a few rhythms that would be useful for you to know, but you just don't know that you've done it yet. So we might look at that as well. There's one aspect is writing down rhythms on a page and clapping them and playing them. But the other is actually to take rhythms you already know and then figure them out and transcribe the rhythm. And that's probably a good place to go if you know some interesting vocal lines. John Puck says, subdivisions, question mark, like the Rush song. I'm not sure. I know John has a good sense of humor, so I'm not sure if if that's in jest. But just to clarify, with subdivisions, I know I've said this before, but I don't want anyone to not know what this is. Essentially, subdividing, we often count into large beats. And subdividing is simply creating smaller divisions under those beats. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that would help us place where things fall on those divisions. And so if a rhythm was like this, because this note here does not fall on a beat, it's harder to place. But if we have dividers on the music, on our counting, that helps us place it like grid paper when you're a math student. And so, of course, you can do smaller and smaller subdivisions. You could do 16th note subdivisions. You could even do 32nd note subdivisions, whatever is useful to help you figure out the music. So that's what the subdivision is. I don't know the song by Rush. So it's just a tool. It's an approach to breaking down rhythms that might be challenging. John, hi John, says, and we'll deal with this. Not sure if this is relevant, but I have a heck of a time dealing with triplets in the middle of a piece. If it's relevant, any suggestions? Oh, and Mr. John Puck did say, just kidding. So this is one of the challenges online with text is humor and sarcasm. Sometimes I always want to give the benefit of the doubt that someone is not joking, but it's a tricky one sometimes. Ian's asked, should we study sight reading before playing simple songs? Well, it's not mutually exclusive. Of course, you can play through simple songs and use whatever reading skills you have available. But I think that, the ability to take music that's new to you, maybe even in a pressure situation with other people, and play that in an approximated way, it doesn't have to be perfect. That is kind of a big key takeaway from sight reading, is a real skill. And the skill, a couple of the sub-skills are not stopping when there's a mistake. So for instance, if you've got a couple of notes at the beginning, right? Easy, a couple of quarter notes. And then you go, whoa, 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 right? There's some bar lines in there. And then there's another easy note there. The skill, and it really is, it sounds like it would be something to be ashamed of. But the skill is to go bop, bop, up, we're lost, we're lost, we're lost, bop, and join back in. That is a skill, and it's an absolutely crucial skill for ensemble playing. And it's we have a little bit of a stigma about mistakes, I think, especially in the classical music world. But all of this, you just drop out. And what's better, to say to everyone, whoa, 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 let's start from the top, let's take it again, or to simply just wait it out and join back in whenever you're ready. That's a skill, and it's a really good one too. Another one, a skill which is similar but harder to develop, is let's say you've got a note, a note, a note, a note, a note. As you maybe scan the music, you see there's something coming up. And you say, well, I'm sight reading. So you actually just drop things out. Or, and this is an interesting parallel with sight reading and improvisation, I think, are relatively closely paired. So it's a skill to either tactically drop out some notes as you're reading through music and just go, let them go, be zen, be one with the world. Or what you can actually do is you can make some stuff up, depending on what makes sense. One of the other things I did at Yale with the students, my guinea pigs, was I took music and I would blank out sections and have them read. And the request was, don't stop. And these were pieces they wouldn't know. There'd be some music that they could play. The first line or two was not edited. And then I started whiting out sections. So it'd be impossible to know what notes should have been there. However, they've already established what the sound of the music is and the kind of rhythms. So they can approximate what's there and you can kind of make it up. And so you kind of fudge your way through these blanked out sections, and that's a skill. So instead of dropping out, which you could also do, you could just keep counting, you're actually improvising, you're approximating what that might be. And that's the sight reading skill. That's the one to develop. So again, you're seeing how this is quite separate from note reading, quite separate from reading accurately and learning a piece of music. Vince asked, do I like the sight reading for classical guitar books by Robert Benedict? I do have them in, everything's in storage in New Jersey. I'm in the process of writing my own sight reading book. I mean, the thesis 10 years ago was in preparation for a sight reading method. I think there's kind of two schools of, well, as I said, there's notation and then there's sight reading. And the tricky thing about writing a sight reading book is you just need tons of material. Because once you start learning something or remembering how something goes, it starts to lose its value as sight reading material. And so I can't speak on authority because I haven't looked at his books for quite a long time, but he also teaches musical concepts and musicianship in the flow of reading, whereas I personally would like something where there's just a lot of very carefully structured material that just gives you material to read and read and read and read and read. You can do that. You can go onto IMSLP and download flute pieces and things like that. So they're great books. I mean, I know someone, I was talking to Bradford Werner actually just the other day on a call, and he was saying he likes using them in a teaching context. So in a lesson, they make a nice materials. So a few more questions. Rich is asking, if the musical texture is too thick, how about just playing a single line or voice to get through it? I've actually done this in the ensemble. Absolutely. So that's very much in line with my very artistic, my approximations here. So what Rich is talking about is, yeah, you see something that's going to be difficult. Let's say, so what he's saying is the texture is thick here. And so instead of dropping out completely, you start getting selective and say, okay, I'm just going to play this melodic line and forget about all the harmony, which is more challenging. Absolutely, that's a skill too. To do that, you need to identify the harmony very quickly, and you need to be able to sort of separate it on the fly. And all of this requires a little bit of letting go of that pressure to be perfect, which is hard to do, seeing as we come up in a relatively, the classical world feels a bit more strict, doesn't it, than some other things. David's the Hector Quine. Yeah, I remember that book. The thing with a lot of these books is very small. The book I'm working on is going to be big. There's a book by, I think it's William Beavitt. It's a Berkeley press. That's more of a jazz world, but that just has lots and lots of passages to read through with harmonic changes. Okay, so let's keep moving on. Thank you for your questions. So, let's start simple. We're talking about finding patterns, right? So let's just let's say, for example, you and I are working in a piece and there's a rhythm that's giving you a bit of challenge. It's going to be a simple one to start off with. Okay. So, there's different challenges in music that will pose rhythmic problems, and a lot of it has to do with syncopation. Syncopation is simply a disturbance of the regular beat. It can be done through accents, it can be done through omission, it can be done through ties. A very simple example would be in 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4. we often in classical music will have an accent on 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And to offer some slight syncopation there, we can simply shift the accent to 2 and 4. That creates what we call a backbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that slight variation there feels different and it tickles us. You know, it's got that kind of, especially if we compared and contrasted if it changed in the middle of the flow of the music. If you want to watch a really great video, you can. There's a, you know, jazz musicians get quite unsettled, I'll put it lightly, when audiences start clapping along on 1 and 3. And there's a really great video of Harry Connick Jr. playing, and it's in, you know, a TV show or something, and the audience is clapping, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. And what he does is he very slyly plays one measure of 5/4. So with that 5 beats, he then throws their claps onto 2 and 4. It's a beautiful little clip. You can probably just Google Harry Connick Jr. 1 and 3 claps or something like that, and it'll come up. It's really funny. So back to this little example. So we've got our 3 steps, right? Our 3 steps is first we're going to break this down. That's not even it's not even a complete measure. Let's make it. I'll just add another quarter. So let's start simply, right? We're gonna find some pillars in this music. Now it's in 4/4, and so we've got something that happens on 1. Great. We've got a note that appears on 3. Great, and a note that appears on 4. So we actually have a lot of information that lines up with the beats. Now a lot of what we can do here, we can do with our hands. And I might do it up here so you can visually see, but often it's good to have 2 surfaces. So if you have a table in front of you, or leg and chest, gives you 2 sounds. It's good to have 2 different sounds. So one hand is going to be keeping the beat. I'll keep it with my left hand, and the other one's going to be clapping the rhythm. So here, we can start off by saying, okay, 1 and 3 and 4, there is a note on each of those beats. So it'd go, I'll just do it all up here. So 1, 3, 4. 1, 3, 4. I'll just loop it. 1, 3, 4. 1, 3, 4. And you can feel the hands coming down together at the same time. So we're lining that up. Great. And so we really, in this case, only have to place this note here. And it comes on the and. So if we're using our subdivision, we break it down into 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It lines up there, right? So it goes 1, we'll have to do subdivisions. 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, 4. So now we've found it, right? We've done that breakdown. It's not very intuitive at this point. We're just breaking it down. Now, let's take a bit more of a practical example. I'll just do this. So it's the same rhythm, but we're going to make it a bit more challenging. So this arrives at the same point, but it's going to be tied to the next note. This is where we start getting to real subdivision, where we sort of lose the sense, like we get the expectation change a little bit of where things should lie. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Right? It has almost a feeling of anticipation to the third beat. 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, 4. Now this rhythm came up yesterday in Take the A Train a lot, right? So what happens is you're going to be subjected to some bad singing, so I apologize in advance. But it's very jazzy kind of little rhythms. Go bom 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 ding dong down bom 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 ba bom 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 ba. And the next step here, we worked it out. We figured out with the subdivision where to line those up. And then you have to workshop it. You have to get it, feeling it intuitive, very familiar, putting it in context, but in different contexts. You can loop that measure. You can put it in context with other 4/4 beats. I was just doing that walking bass. And this technique, by the way, I love it. It's very physical. You can do it while you're walking. You can do it while you're moving, standing. Bum, bum, bum. Dee-dum, bum, 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 ba, ba. And it's a simple little unit. But think about how much variety we have in classical guitar music in terms of rhythm. It's not that much. We actually don't have that much rhythmic variety compared to Afro-Cuban rhythms, layered rhythms, 7/8 time Balkan time signature. You know, it's really pretty straightforward, the stuff we deal with. So there's not too many things to learn. And once you start compartmentalizing this, you know, for those of you who might join us at the next summer school, we'll be reading music, and if you see that rhythm and you've worked on it, you're not reading anymore. You know it. It's like a familiar word. You just go bum bum supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Done. Right. So break it down, figure it out, familiarize it by repeating it, looping it, putting it into some different contexts, and then over time that will become a pattern that you might recognize. Now, I don't know what time it is. I always run out of time here. Yeah, okay. We're going to jump. We could do a few more examples of increasing difficulty, but I'm going to go to triplet land because it was a question that was coming up, and I think you know, triplets throw people off. One thing I will say is a little bit of a slight tangent, but this has come up a few times, and I was talking with some friends going, oh yeah, a lot of music in classical guitar will be in triplets, but it's not explained. So for instance, you know, romanza, right? It'll have this pattern. I'm sure you've seen it. It comes up in the Giuliani studies. The groupings of 3 notes together, but they don't say triplet. And it will say, so it'll also say this, 3, 4, and then it'll have groupings of 3. And you look at them and you say, 9 eighth notes in 3, it doesn't add up. So it's one of those things that happens quite a bit in classical music where there's supposed knowledge, expected knowledge of certain things. And this is one of the weird ones in classical guitar. So technically they're all triplets, right? But the real question is, why are we doing it in triplets when we could be actually more correctly and perhaps more simply in 9/8, right? So we'll break down triplets now, but anyway, there's just a little bit of an aside that in classical guitar music, there's a lot of groupings of 3, which are just assumed, oh, just play them as triplets. But if you really try and break it down, it doesn't actually make sense. It's one of those funny things. You know, often when people talk about tab and standard notation, there's a bit of, people get argumentative about that. But, you know, and people will point out faults or deficiencies of tablature. But standard notation has tons of deficiencies. That's not a perfect communication tool. It really isn't. So I think it's important to acknowledge. And also there's a lot of idiosyncrasies to particular instruments, and that's a perfect example of one for classical guitar. Now, here's a really simple way to understand triplets. It all comes down to math, which I was never good at, or it never came naturally anyway. So if you want to figure out how to break down the subdivisions of any overlapping rhythms, we're going to do 3/2. You just times them. So 3/2, 3 times 2, 6. All right, so let's take 6. Forget about beats and everything. Just stay with me on this one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 6 numbers, and they're representing just even ticks. Even ticks of the metronome. Now, if we were to take that span of time and divide it into 2, we're going to have 1 clap, 1 tick on 1, and the other one on 4. And that's going to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 2 notes, also known as a duplet. We don't often hear the term duplet because it's so standard. It's just normally what we see. 2/8 notes together, duplet, that's what it's called, but we don't often name it. We often do name, however, triplets. So a triplet, if we divide this group of 6 into 3, we would start with 1, so they're at the same place. The next note would be on 3, and the next note is on 5. That would look like this. Same amount of time. And then often we have a little thing just denoting that it's a triplet. We don't need that if we're in a 4/4, 2/4, 3/4 time signature, but just for clarity. So that's a span of time. That's all it is. Span of time divided into 6. And we're choosing to play it either that divided in 6 in 2 parts or 3 parts. So you can join in with me at home. This will work even though we can't hear one another. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I want you to clap on 1 and 4. That's it. That's all you need to do. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you just played some duplets. Now, this time I'm going to count to 6 and I want you to clap on 1, 3, and 5. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So often when you see triplets in a piece of music, it kind of, it kind of freaks us out. I remember going through and just approximating them, just thinking triplet, just get 3 notes in there, just squash them, whatever. But it's really very simple mathematically. We're just dividing this span of time into 6. So you can either do 2 or 3. Now the fun thing, let's do a fun thing together. Let's start simply. So I'm going to get you to play the top line. I'm asking you to clap on 1 and 4. And I will clap on 1, 3, and 5. And together we're going to make a rhythm. Ready? So 6 for nothing, as they say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Did we get a nice rhythm? Let's swap. I'm now going to clap on 1 and 4, and you were going to clap on 1, 3, and 5. I'm going to swap this around. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What we would have gotten if we had heard each other is this. Now this is a fun thing to do. It's a challenge for you. Is to essentially do the same thing. And again, we can just do it. You can take your 2 hands, right? This hand, my left hand, so let's do it together. Your left hand is going to do the 3 on 1, 3, and 5. And the right is on 1 and 4. And I'm going to make this even simpler in a moment. But let's start. We'll do it slowly. Ready? So really slowly so it's easy for us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. I messed it up. I should have started this whole lesson with the big disclaimers. I am no rhythm master. But what we were just doing is 3/2. Now, I would recommend practicing that and just taking it very slowly. It's a bit of this kind of movement, right? And then speeding it up. But the next thing, which gives you a little trick, which is similar to the rhythmic is, as Elma, I think, mentioned before, associating words. So a little phrase that has this rhythm is 4 funny frogs. 4 funny frogs. 4 funny frogs. 4 funny frogs. Funny frogs. So you can practice that in your own time. And then see if you can translate it to the guitar. It works. It works just fine. Now, just for fun, and if you're at a party, And you're not good at reading social cues because there will be no social cue for you to bring this up unless you're with other musicians. But try it out anyway. What about 4 over 3 or 3 over 4? It doesn't matter which way it is. That's an interesting one. So we had just then 3 over 2. Now 4 over 3 is more complex. But using the same logic, we did how many beats do we need to divide it up? 6. 3 times 2, 6. So 4 over 3 would be 4 times 3, 12. Same idea. Same idea, but we just use more numbers. So 4. What are we doing? We're 4 on the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And 3 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Same idea. Same idea. And it works if we go through the same steps. Yes. 4 over 3. It's just math. It's just math. Now I'm going to skip the part where we go through all of that, and I'll just play you the rhythm with the words. And it is cook the uncooked chicken. Now I've done this with school kids around New York City, but I used to do outreach in all the 5 different boroughs, and we used to go around and do this. So it works really well. It just starts slow, get people to clap on different numbers, flip it around. What we did with the 3 over 2. So it's a good example of breaking it down, you know. And back to John's question, JR's question, of much more practical. Like, what do I do when I get up to this? Well, it is about having a strong feel for it. You know, if we went back to the 3-2, you could start alternating yourself. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, instead of keeping it the same, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going between them evenly. Still nice at that slow rhythm, but you start building up a feel for the change between 3 divisions of a span of time and 2 divisions of a span of time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I think I've seen, I have to stand away from the computer today, but I saw some references to Bernstein, I think, West Side Story, I Went to Live in America. So this is a hemiola. Canarios. What is it? Gaspar Sanz Canarios uses a hemiola a lot. I need to have a little pause. I've gone through this experience because I was never a player that picked this up intuitively, so I worked through it, and I know some of it feels overwhelming, but I do recommend going through the motions of doing this. You can watch the video back and go through a couple of the exercises, and they start to, again, they become patterns, and that's the goal, actually. It feels almost like it's cheating, like you should always be figuring it out. No, actually, we want the simple thing where you learn it well, and you repeat it correctly, and then it becomes a pattern that you don't actually have to think about. So all rhythms like this. And like I said a while back, this is a teaching you how to fish kind of lesson. So what I would suggest is go through the repertoire that you play, or maybe repertoire that you aspire to play. That would also be useful. Find some challenging rhythms. Rhythms that, you know, you'd have to be honest with yourself and say, if I was sight reading that, I wouldn't do it justice. I wouldn't do it correctly. So find those and just workshop them, loop them. I loved, when I used to live in Harlem, I used to walk down the side of Central Park and, you know, walking, because the nice thing about the side of Central Park is there's no crossings. There's only a couple of crossings. So you get these long stretches of walking. And with a regular gait, there's your pulse. There it is. You can do all sorts of rhythms. And it's really fun. So I recommend doing it while walking. It's a really great way of doing it. Need to breathe a bit more. So I think there's been quite a few people sort of, quoting pieces that exhibit different rhythms. And that's a really nice way to go about it, to find pieces that, have these rhythms. And you can references. Same with learning intervals, perfect fifth is Star Wars. Bum, bum, ba-da-da-dum. And then perfect fourth is the Australian national anthem. Bum, 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 bum. And then, minor second is Jaws. Ba, 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 ba. We're using mnemonic devices to remember things. Same thing works for rhythms. So if you can find pieces of music that lock in a certain pattern for you, that's great. Oh yeah, so Vicky's asking about developing an internal pulse. So I think walking is my favorite one. And if you are more inclined to dance, I think dancing is great too. So the thing about dancing and moving is that you have a lot of subdivisions going on in your body without knowing it. So, if you're just bouncing like this to music and just 1, a 2, I'm subdividing with noises in my mouth. 1, a 2. I'm subdividing with a 2. I'm subdividing with bouncing. It probably looks funny on the video. All of those are actually little subdivisions that come rather intuitively to our movement, and they're helping us stay on the beat. So dancing, or even if you're just okay to move around, sitting in a chair, that all helps. It all provides subdivisions. Another question from John. If whole sections or the entire piece is in triplets, it's not too bad. But when triplets show up in the middle of quarter note sections, yeah. So that transition, that's what I was talking about before, going between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, da, da, da. And doing that in a linear, and clapping away from the guitar. Huge. Step away from the guitar. I should have said that at the very beginning. Notice how the guitar has not featured at all today. It's going to be a huge help. Nice dancing. Thank you. Well, good. All right. Let me give you one more example. You can ask some questions if you want. We may run a little overtime today, but rhythm is important. I'll give you one more example. This is a good example of a pattern that is, I was thinking about teaching clave rhythms, but then I thought, when's the last time I saw a clave rhythm in classical guitar music? I'm sure there are examples, but it's, not as common as other things. But one rhythm that I come across a lot, it comes up a lot in Argentinian milongas, but also it's sort of been used in people imitating that style or taking on board of that. We've looked at a couple of things with ties, and we looked at triplets and duplets, but another way to subdivide is with accents and or groupings. So we're in 4/4, and I just wrote 8 dots on the board. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Now, that's great. But we're gonna first of all divide that up, partition that a bit differently. So normally we would probably accent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? So eighth notes, 1 and 3. What I want to do is divide that up slightly differently. And you might start recognizing this rhythm. So instead of dividing up with accents on 1 and 5, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's one way to do it. And I could beam it in 2 groups of 4, like eighth notes. But what often happens is you'll actually change the beaming. And because you're changing the beaming, you don't need the accents. It's a bit redundant, actually. So you might come across music that looks like that in 4/4, and you sort of say, "What are they, triplets? What's going on?" But what's actually happening is you're just grouping the notes, having, when we group things, inherently the first of that group is going to have that accent, just usually by the way we go about things. So dee da da dee da da dee da dee da da dee da da dum bum bum bum. Another rhythm that might develop out of this. Yes. Da, 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 dee, da, da. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And you hear I'm counting it differently. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. We're still in 4/4, but this is another interesting way of that rhythm throws us off. And this rhythm is very common in classical guitar music. So it's yet another example of, if you're not experienced with this rhythm, if you haven't played Milonga de Angel or a lot of South American milongas, I know a lot of non-South American players have adopted this rhythm as well. Richard Charlton in Australia uses it a lot. It's just a really nice rhythm. But if you haven't dealt with that before, it might seem challenging or foreign. But once you get used to it and you've played it through, again, pattern recognition. So you could play a scale right now. You could go C, D, E, da, da, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, and just internalize that rhythm, make it a pattern, and next time you see it, the work is done for you. I've got to get some lessons of a singer of how to breathe while talking. All right, well, it's 10:59. Does anyone have any questions? Do you like the whiteboard? I quite enjoy using the whiteboard, I have to say. Any questions about rhythm? Yeah, Lynette made a comment about flamenco compas, which uses 12, goes up to 12, and that would be a great exploration of rhythm, but I have to say I do not have too much experience with that, so I can't speak more on it, but that would be really fun. The other thing with rhythms is you can delve into the world of, a lot of the countries, or ethnomusicology. So you go to the Balkans, like I said, you often have time signatures like 7/8 or 5/8. The music of Dusan Bogdanovic exhibits, a lot of those time signatures. They're really interesting, and they're not as daunting as you might think, and they open up all of these possibilities for different sounds. And instead of 4/4 and 3/4 and 2/4, our world of Carulli and Carcassi and Giuliani, it's really pretty straight, and there's a lot of rhythms out there to explore that are just, rhythm gets us on that more primal level, I think, and it's really fun. So hugely recommended to explore, be curious. Vern likes the whiteboard. Carlos is asking about when the text is coming out. Well, I'm doing a method book right now, actually. That's the first thing, and it's almost finished. That's the next thing. And then I'm working on, I've already done 50 pages of the sight reading book, but it's kind of ideas and drafts, and I'll be working on that more in January. Cindy, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Ian likes the eraser beach towel. Yeah, I don't have one of the official ones, so I sacrificed a kitchen thing. Don't tell Evita. Lynette likes the whiteboard. Yeah, Tenny's saying, great lesson. I tried to learn some pop songs recently, and the rhythms were the most challenging part. Yeah, absolutely. Pop music, jazz music, dance music, Afro-Cuban music, South American music. There are so many interesting rhythms, and for our experience with classical music, they offer a huge challenge, but also a great opportunity to explore some interesting rhythms. And I think, pop music is full of interesting rhythms and textures and all sorts of things. There's pop music sometimes gets a bit of a bad rap. It just really means popular, but there's some really interesting, cool things that happen, and it's worth diving into. I remember one of my colleagues at Yale, she did her doctorate on her thesis on Radiohead, and I'm a big fan of Radiohead, and they do some amazing rhythmic things and textural things, so absolutely. All right, well, well, thank you everyone for joining me. We will have another show next week, but it might be time to wrap up the CGC show season 3, and then we can enjoy the year end and maybe start it off again in 2022. I welcome any ideas for the final show, but maybe we'll bring on the team to have a chat. We'll see. Thank you, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you soon. All right. Bye, everyone.